When Mexico announced it would release 23 American bison into the Janos desert grasslands in 2009, the world chuckled. Too hot, they said. Too dry, it'll never work. Critics called it a waste of money, of animals, of hope. But now, a decade later, satellite images show something stunning. Grasslands are returning. Wildlife is rebounding. And the bison? Thriving. What began as a bold gamble may have just rewritten the rules of ecosystem restoration. The bold experiment takes shape. By the early 2000s, the grasslands of northern Mexico were an ecological freefall. Where once there had been open prairie teeming with life, now there were stretches of desertified land, hardened soil, and scattered thorn scrub. The American bison, extinct from this region since the late 1800s, had long been erased from the story. Water retention plummeted, biodiversity dropped, and erosion carved through brittle plains. Scientists called it collapse. Locals called it survival. But then, a radical idea emerged. What if the land's decline wasn't irreversible? What if the answer wasn't more machinery, but fewer assumptions? In 2009, a coalition of Mexican conservationists, U.S. scientists, and wildlife agencies proposed an experiment. Reintroduce bison, into the Janos region of Chihuahua, near the U.S. border. From healthy, genetically pure U.S. herds, particularly from Wind Cave National Park, they selected 23 animals for a new beginning. Critics called it naive. Many doubted the plan's feasibility. Could a handful of massive grazers, each weighing over 900 kilograms, really transform a degraded landscape? Would the fragile desert grassland climate support them? Was this conservation or just romanticism? Ranchers feared new competition for water and forage. Government agencies hesitated, but the team moved forward, driven by a single hope: to let nature try what humans had failed to fix. When the trailers rolled in and the gates opened in late 2009, a silence fell across the Janos Valley. The bison stepped onto Mexican soil for the first time in more than a century. Dust rose, hooves hit the earth, cameras clicked. And in that simple moment, a gamble had begun, not on technology, but on biology, memory, and the sheer resilience of life. But to understand what was truly at stake, we must look backward. Before the experiment, before the revival, there was a land weighed down by silence. No thunder of hooves, no flutter of meadowlarks. The next section explores what the grasslands had become in the bison's absence, and why that emptiness made their return both necessary and extraordinary. A land weighed down by loss. Without bison, the grasslands lost their architects. For thousands of years, their hooves had aerated soil, churned nutrients, and planted seeds through sheer movement. With their removal in the 19th century, that cycle ended. By the 1990s, satellite imagery showed the effects clearly: vegetation thinning, shrublands expanding, and bare soil increasing across northern Chihuahua's prairie zones. The land hardened. Without hooves to break the crust, rain no longer sank, it ran off. Native grasses gave way to mesquite and creosote, while dust storms increased in frequency. This process, called desertification, was no longer theoretical. It was happening acre by acre. Water tables dropped, springs dried, and small-scale farming became harder with each passing season. Wildlife that depended on open grassland disappeared. Burrowing owls, black-tailed prairie dogs, and kit foxes dwindled. Predators like the ferruginous hawk vanished from their hunting grounds. Communities noticed the silence: less birdsong, fewer insects, even declining yields in nearby croplands. Wells were deeper, soil was poorer, and still the scrub spread. By the early 2000s, local conservationists, including teams from the Fondo Mexicano para la Conservación de la Naturaleza, FMCN, realized that restoring plants alone wouldn't work. They needed the processes back, the cycles of movement, disturbance, and fertilization that only large herbivores could provide. They needed bison, not just as a species, but as a system. The land was ready, but would the bison be? The next step wasn't just ecological, it was logistical, biological, and deeply symbolic. Section 3 takes us into the heart of the relocation. How 23 animals crossed an international border, entered an uncertain landscape, and began the first tentative steps toward revival in a place many believed they would never survive. Boarding the herd. The process of selecting the 23 bison destined for Mexico's Janos Biosphere Reserve was deliberate and scientific. Conservationists prioritized animals from herds with high genetic purity, avoiding lineages with past cattle hybridization. The National Park Service, working with partners from Wind Cave National Park and El Uno Ecological Reserve, conducted health screenings, tagging, and behavioral evaluations to ensure the relocated herd had the best chance at survival. Transporting the animals was no small feat. Each bison required individual handling, sedation, and containment for the long journey south. Crossing the U.S.-Mexico border involved coordinated veterinary inspections, permits, and custom protocols. In December 2009, after more than 18 months of planning, the first American bison in over a century touched down on Mexican prairie. The first days were tense. Would they eat the native grasses? Would they range widely or linger near the release zone? Biologists monitored their movement via GPS collars and direct observation. Signs of grazing, wallowing, and herd cohesion offered cautious optimism. By the end of the first month, the bison had begun to explore, forage, and settle into patterns resembling wild behavior. But this was more than an ecological footnote. The arrival of bison was a cultural echo, reminders of a time before borders when massive herds roamed from Canada to northern Mexico, shaping landscapes and sustaining indigenous communities. Their return was not just about restoration, it was about reconnection. Once on the ground, the question shifted from will they survive to what will they do? The following section reveals how almost immediately the bison began reshaping the land, not through intention, but instinct. From soil to water to vegetation, their very presence triggered processes long dormant, revealing just how powerful a single species can be. Nature's engineers at work. As the bison began to settle across the Janos Valley, their effect on the land became visible, quietly, then suddenly. Each step their 1,000-kilogram bodies took broke open the hardened crust of the soil, long sealed by drought and neglect. These cracks became portals for rainwater, seeping deep into the earth where before it had only pooled and evaporated. In the first rainy season after their release, moisture retention improved in areas they frequented. Unlike cattle, which often linger in one place and overgraze, bison are constant movers. Their nomadic grazing patterns created a mosaic, some patches trimmed close to the ground, others left to grow, seed, and replenish. This dynamic distribution triggered a cycle of plant diversity unseen in decades. Native grasses like blue grama and side oats grama began reappearing alongside forbs and flowering species crucial to pollinators. Their waste mattered too. Each pile of dung was a biological hotspot, filled with nitrogen, phosphorus, and beneficial microbes. Insects followed, feeding off the manure and aerating soil in the process. Seeds caught in their fur fell across the landscape, restoring native flora in unexpected pockets. Even their wallowing, rolling on the ground to shed parasites, formed shallow depressions that collected rain, becoming temporary pools for amphibians and insects. By the third year, remote cameras and drone flights recorded measurable improvements in plant cover, soil texture, and water infiltration. What had started as the movement of 23 animals became an engineering force, a living mechanism of ecosystem repair. Scientists didn't teach them what to do. The bison already knew. And then came the response, the land's answer to the bison's return. Insects, rodents, and predators all began to reappear, pulled by the transformed Habitat Section 5, explores how the return of a single species didn't just change the soil, it reawakened a vanished web of life, from burrows to skies. A cascade of life? By year 4, signs of revival were no longer subtle. In areas regularly grazed and traversed by the bison, scientists began documenting the return of small mammals, notably black-tailed prairie dogs and kangaroo rats. These burrowers hadn't been recorded in meaningful numbers since the early 1990s, but now their mounds dotted the grasslands again, aerating soil and providing shelter for others. That resurgence triggered a second wave. Predators long absent from the region, like burrowing owls, long-tailed weasels, and even kit foxes returned. Drawn by a recovering prey-based nesting surveys in 2014 showed the reappearance of meadowlarks, grasshopper sparrows, and the rare-bearded sparrow, all species tied closely to intact prairie. For the first time in decades, bird songs returned to the Janos dawn. Insects thrived too. Pollinator counts increased across the reserve, with butterflies, bees, and beetles all responding to renewed floral diversity. Insects fed birds. Birds fed foxes. Foxes controlled rodents. The old rhythm, the ecological pulse, had returned. Even shallow seasonal streams began to hold water longer, a result of improved soil sponge effect. In turn, amphibians like the spade-foot toad and chorus frog were recorded after a near 20-year absence. The recovery reached into the human world. Local ranchers, once skeptical, noticed reduced dust, better water retention, and fewer invasive shrubs on shared boundaries. The once laughed-at idea was showing measurable results, not just in biology, but in visible, everyday change. What began as a herd was becoming a movement, but data would tell the most convincing story. The next chapter delves into the numbers, the population growth, the aerial imagery, and the way even satellites now track this revival. In Section 6, we see how statistics, once used to doubt the bison's return, now serve to confirm its success. The numbers tell the story. The original 23 bison released in 2009 grew steadily. By 2020, the herd had surpassed 150 individuals, with calf survival rates above 80% in favorable years. Population modeling projected a sustainable growth trajectory, supported by genetic monitoring programs in coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Mexican conservation authorities. Biologists conducted annual health checks and tracked movement using GPS collaring. The data showed that bison ranged across 15,000 plus hectares, creating a shifting patchwork of grazed and regrowing areas. Satellite imagery from 2010 to 2020 revealed a notable 35% increase in ground vegetation density across core zones. These weren't abstract metrics. They were proof of landscape-level change. Social metrics were just as striking. Local landowners reported better pasture conditions adjacent to reserve zones. Ecotourism interests sparked new programs, including bison viewing tours and youth conservation initiatives. Educational exchanges between U.S. and Mexican students, rangers, and researchers further solidified cross-border ecological diplomacy, especially after the 2024 U.S.-Mexico-Canada Bison Conservation Pact formalized collaborative restoration. What once seemed a symbolic gesture had become a case study in regenerative ecology. Even critics began to soften their stance. The question was no longer, can bison live here? But what can we learn from what they're doing? It wasn't just survival, it was success. Still, no restoration comes without conflict. Section 7 confronts the lingering doubts, challenges, and opposition that continue to shape the Bison Project's future. From ranching tensions to climate stress, the next chapter examines the hurdles and the balancing act between ecological ambition and real-world complexity. Critics and challenges. While the results impressed ecologists, skepticism never fully vanished. From the beginning, ranchers in northern Chihuahua worried that bison would outcompete their cattle, damage fences, or spread disease. These concerns were real. Cattle ranching remains an economic lifeline, and the introduction of large, roaming herbivores raised questions about land use, property rights, and biosecurity. Ecological concerns also persisted. Not all researchers agreed that bison were suited to semi-arid desert grassland systems. A 2012 USGS report warned that without sufficient rainfall or migration corridors returns, bison populations could stagnate or degrade sensitive habitats. Others pointed to the risk of overgrazing if herd management lagged behind reproduction rates, especially during drought years. Genetic integrity was another issue. Maintaining a wild, self-sustaining population meant avoiding both inbreeding and excessive human intervention, biologists face constant decisions, whether to intervene in health issues, how to cull or transfer animals to new herds, and how to prevent behavioral changes from too much human contact. The balance between wildness and management became an ongoing tension. Then there was the climate. Northern Mexico remains vulnerable to prolonged droughts, increasingly erratic precipitation, and desertification pressures exacerbated by climate change. These external forces could stall or even reverse the recovery. The challenge wasn't just restoring the system, but keeping it resilient in an uncertain future. Despite the tensions, the Bison project illuminated something rare in conservation: progress without perfection. Section 8 turns from conflict to philosophy, exploring what this story teaches us about ecological repair, not just as a science, but as a rethinking of how humans live with and not over the land. The bigger meaning. The return of bison to the Chihuahuan grasslands was never just about repopulating a species. It was about reviving ecological processes. These animals, once called ecosystem engineers, reintroduced forces that no machine could mimic: hooves breaking ground, cycles of grazing and regeneration, natural fertilization, and mobile disturbance that rewired the land's rhythms. In doing so, the project quietly challenged traditional methods. Where conventional restoration often means tractors, seeding programs, or chemical amendments, this approach asked, what if we let life repair life? What if the answer isn't more management, but the return of missing players in nature's own design? There was cultural healing too. For many indigenous communities, the bison holds ancestral and spiritual significance. Though the Mexican herds are not yet tied to tribal lands, the symbolism resonates, reconnecting human memory with animal presence. The grasslands, once a corridor of shared migration, now hum with echoes of a time when land, species, and people moved together. 10 years after the experiment began, the results are not just visible, they're measurable. But has it truly worked? Section 9 gathers the verdict from scientists, locals, and policymakers alike, summarizing a decade's worth of transformation and what it means for the future of rewilding in North America and beyond. 10 years later. By 2020, a decade after the initial release, aerial surveys, soil sampling, and wildlife monitoring painted a compelling picture. Vegetation in core grazing zones increased by 30 to 40%, with deeper root structures and improved water retention. Land that had once cracked under sun now held its shape through seasonal rains, evidence of a new hydrological balance. Wildlife data confirms systemic recovery. Bird censuses reported a 75% increase in grassland-dependent species. Burrowing mammals expanded territory. Even predators like the badger and coyote, once rare in these regions, began appearing consistently. The ecosystem wasn't just functioning, it was regenerating with bison at its core. The herd had also grown, from 23 bison in 2009 to over 200 by 2024, across multiple reserves in Mexico. Genetic testing showed healthy diversity. Collaboration with U.S. and Canadian partners, including the 2024 U.S.-Mexico-Canada Bison Conservation Pact, ensured future herd transfers and data sharing, cementing the program as a continent-wide effort. And now the story shifts to its final chapter, not in numbers but in meaning. In Section 10, we reflect on the deeper lesson. What bison taught us not just about ecology, but about healing. What once seemed impossible has now reshaped how we think about land, time, and the return of what was lost. A lesson for the planet. What happened in Janos wasn't just a conservation project, it was a revelation. Over 10 years, a vanished species rewired an entire landscape, not with machines or mandates, but with instincts. The bison, left to be themselves, reshaped soil, brought back water, rebuilt food webs, and revived memory etched in hoof prints. Nature's logic had worked. What decades of tractors, reseeding, and erosion control couldn't accomplish, one keystone species did, simply by being present. That truth cuts deep. Sometimes the best fix isn't to act more, but to remove the blockages and let life resume its course. Today, the laughter is gone, replaced by awe. The bison didn't just survive, they revived a landscape. Over 200 strong, their hooves have cracked hardened earth, seeded lost prairies, and reawakened life across a vanishing ecosystem. The lesson is clear. Sometimes the answers don't lie in labs or machines, but in letting nature remember itself. What once seemed impossible now stands as proof that the wild, if trusted, can heal what we believed was lost forever.